Hello and welcome to Art Hops. I'm your host, Amy Kolar-Anderson, and this is the show where we pair creative individuals with regionally brewed creations. So today our guest is Rob Boley.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers.
Cheers.
And we are mixing it up a little bit for episode 3. We have decided to go on location to Eudora Brewing Company. So a big thank you to them for letting us invade their beautiful space and hang out with their brew kettles. These are actually where they do the individual brewing. So we're here today with Rob Boley. Rob is a local writer, and we have a couple of his books here today, and we're going to talk about mashing genres.
Yes, indeed.
So Rob, tell us a little bit about what is genre mashing and what brought you to it.
Well, I think it's anytime you take, two distinct types of writing or types of art, and then you mash them together. In my series, what I'm doing is I'm taking classic horror monsters, be it zombies, werewolves, vampires, and mashing them with classic fairy tales.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And that's called the Scarey Tales. That's the name
Scarey
of the
Tales.
series.
Yeah, so we have the first two in this series. That Risen Snow, which is available for free right now in digital version, if people prefer digital or they just want to try a little sampling. I will say that I did that. I downloaded it, and I normally, lately, have not been able to finish any books. I don't know what my deal is, but I loved this book, and I did finish it. And I'm really looking forward to taking this hard copy home with me and continuing the series. So
thank you so much.
So yeah, it's really fun. And we're going to talk about, not only how you mashed your varying genres together, but a little bit about the books themselves and the characters and all that good stuff. So, so it starts out with kind of the classic Snow White fairy tale. You think, oh, here's the prince, he's arrived, everything's going to be beautiful and romantic. Well, it doesn't.
To say the least, yes.
Yeah, so in the first chapter, you set the stage, the prince arrives, plants the kiss, and I think you say something like, she woke up, but she didn't wake up right.
Yes, exactly.
And that's when all hell breaks loose.
Yeah, and it kind of how this whole thing started. My daughter, when she was about 3 or 4 years old, she just got obsessed with the Snow White Disney film, and we watched it, probably several times a week for several weeks in a row. And at some point in all that, your mind just kind of starts to play around with it. And near the end of one of these mini viewings, I just kind of had this thought, like, well, that's kind of a ripoff. Like, why would somebody as powerful as this queen go through all this trouble to curse this apple and make this seemingly pretty powerful curse that can just be broken by a kiss?
Right.
So I had the thought, like, well, wouldn't it be a lot cooler if that kiss was a catalyst for something worse, like a viral stage of the curse? Originally it was going to be probably just a little one-off short story. But once I started writing it and started playing around with these characters and kind of figuring out backstories, I saw, this could actually be a book. And then that book turned into a trilogy, and then that trilogy is going to end up being probably a 9-part series when it's all said and done.
That's going to be amazing.
Yeah.
So I saw, let's see, you have 4 completed now, right?
Yes, yeah.
And I think you mentioned that the 5th one will be out in October?
Yeah, the 5th one will be out in ebook in October, and then paperback subsequently after that.
Okay, excellent. So let's see, so for those that aren't familiar with a little bit of the history of Snow White, because one of the things that sort of threw me off at first with your books is that the dwarf names are changed. Yeah. And I asked you about that, and you said, of course, I don't want to be sued by Disney. And I was like, well, that makes a lot of sense. But then I started looking into it, and Disney is not the first one to give them names. It was actually a Broadway play in 1912, and some of the names that they gave were Blick, Flick, Glick, Snick, Plick, Wick, and Quee. so Disney mixed it up with the ones that we're most familiar with. And then you changed it up again to Grouchy, Merry, Bones, Blushful, Coffee, Dim, and Snoozy.
Yes.
So, and they're not your typical everything sunshine and roses dwarves, whistle while you work. They've got a lot of backstory.
Yeah, well, so it kind of, I obviously I knew I couldn't use the Disney names, so I did sort of variations on that. Instead of Grumpy, you have Grouchy. Instead of Happy, you have Merry. But the names kind of gave like this kind of cool. It kind of set up the backstory for each dwarf. So their name sort of hints at what their issue is that they're kind of dealing with as a person, as a dwarf. And they're not just out there at this mining colony. They're the little colony that they live in is actually sort of like a halfway house for wayward dwarves, or dwarves that aren't fitting in with the rest of dwarf society. So they're all mainly like adolescent dwarfs, or the dwarf version of adolescents. And then they have their elder Bones that's sort of more or less kind of their caretaker. He's sort of watching over them, trying to help them deal with these issues.
He's sort of their therapist.
Basically, basically, yeah. Part camp counselor, part therapist, part boss. Yeah.
So what? So with mashing genres, just to get back to that a little bit, I came across a couple examples as doing research for this. We've got the Blair Witch Project, which combines documentary and horror, and Shaun of the Dead, which is combining romantic comedy and horror. And then with your fairy tale horror, it's almost like it's getting back to what fairy tales were originally. They've been so Disneyfied these last few years, where everything is so happy, shiny people, and maybe there's the one sad moment or whatnot, but it's not like fairy tales used to be, where people were getting limbs hacked, and
Yeah. I mean, so in writing this series, like I did go back to the core Grimm's fairy tales. There's actually a really good book by Philip Pullman, who did the Golden Compass series. He published this big hardback book of all his favorite Grimm's fairy tales. And that's pretty much what I used for a lot of my research, because as the books progress, I incorporate more fairy tale characters, plus a ton of Easter eggs. Like just about any fairy tale you could think of in some way is going to be referenced in this series. But yeah, they originally were very very brutal, very intense tales. So mashing them with horror monsters is not a stretch. I mean, it fits really well. But it also, I think when you're mashing, especially in the literary world, when you're mashing genres together, when it works well, it's you find something in each that complements the other. The first, this is going back a ways, but the first genre mashup that I ever remember reading was actually a Batman comic. This was back in the late '80s. Somebody did this comic called Gotham by Gaslight, where they took they took the Batman concept, but took it back in the time of Jack the Ripper, and you had this Jack the Ripper versus Batman story, which was actually really well done, and it kind of took the best of both genres and mashed them together, and then both stories you take place in this very very gothic, very very dark, dirty, gritty city. So it totally worked, and it's still a very popular story today, amongst comic book people. So yeah, there's definitely a precedent for doing that, and there's as a writer, it can be a lot of fun to mash those genres together and play with those characters, and especially fairy tales, because they're such iconic, beautiful characters. There's so much symbolism going on there, and everybody. It's also nice because everybody knows these characters, so there's it's kind of a nice shortcut. Right away. The first page of the first book. You know who these dwarfs are. You know who Snow White is. So it's kind of a nice leapfrog. You can get right into the action.
Yeah, you don't have to do all the background story. But then as the story progresses, you jump back and forth in time to the dwarves before they interacted with Snow, and then their life with her, which is very different than the Disney version too. They end up walking in on her naked, and she smoke a cigar or something like that. She does, or she gets drunk, or she's not the pure little
Well, and that was I mean, the big reason for making Snow this kind of swarthy, kind of much more intense character is that you have the iconic scene where someone who knows she's being pursued by dark forces takes an apple from a complete stranger in the woods, and so for that scene to work, either Snow White has to be a complete idiot, or she has to have some serious issues, or be in some way impaired.
Right.
So I went with the latter, and she was basically hungover during that scene where she takes the apple, and probably not thinking 100% straight, and then just kind of worked backward from there. Like, okay, so why would she be hungover? What was going on in her head, and then just kind of discovered this really cool character, and that a lot of people really seem to relate to and really enjoy. A lot of people have told me this is like their favorite version of Snow White. So that means a lot.
And you also did a photo shoot that we have I have a photo that we'll put up on the screen. But you did a bunch of fun shots with this model dressed up as Snow White, but covered in blood and the apple and stuff. And in some of this scenes, you're sort of heroic, and some of the shots.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, you're a little terrified. But my favorite is definitely the one where you guys are both reading books, and then she has your book upside down. So I just thought it was like a clever little twist, which ties a lot into your writing, because you have lots of little word plays and clever twists to the characters.
Thank you. Yeah, and that photo shoot was a lot of fun. I was lucky enough to have Haley Dobkins is a Wright State theater student, and Leanna Hornick is a Wright State film student. She's the one who took the pictures, and the three of us just had a great time. We were actually out in the woods at Wright State, taking most of those pictures, and
nice.
it was very creative, and we all kind of worked together, and we had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah.
So it was a good time.
Yeah. And then I also found on your website that there was a shot of you walking into, I believe it was one of the cemeteries where Dracula was inspired, like Bram Stoker was inspired to write Dracula.
Yeah, that's Macross Abbey out in Ireland. I'm trying to think of the name of the forest. That's like southwestern Ireland. Supposedly, Bram Stoker summered around that area, and there was a local legend about somebody that lived out in this cemetery near this abbey, and supposedly they stayed there, during the day, or slept there during the day, and like went out at night and did, I don't know, whatever kinds of creepy, nefarious things.
Yeah.
And a lot of people kind of think that that's probably where he got at least some of the initial seeds for the Dracula story.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a pretty amazing and creepy place to visit. It was very, very interesting.
Yeah. See, I've heard the same thing about, I think it was Whitby Abbey in
Okay.
England. I don't know if you've heard of that or been there. Because I heard that was also inspired Dracula. So I'm going to have to.
Well, I imagine the
check
locals
that
at
out.
all these abbeys just kind of, they're trying to get their hands around the legend.
We inspired Dracula. Come
Right.
here. Gift shops to the left. But yeah, so I mentioned earlier we're on location. We're at Eudora Brewing, and we thank them for not only letting us set up and take over the space, but also for the brew. Mm-hmm. And today we have Thunderball, which is their oatmeal stout, and we are seated in front of their copper kettles. They do private, or rather they do class settings where people can brew their own beer, which I thought was a really interesting twist to a lot of the brew companies that are around here now.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the only of the local breweries. I'm pretty sure it's the only one that has the in-house brewing where people can actually come in and brew on premises, which is nice because I've never brewed at home, but I've helped people do it, and it is a mess. So it's nice if you don't want to trash your own kitchen. This is a good place to come out and
learn from professionals.
Yeah, exactly.
My husband tried with a friend of his, and I think of the maybe half a dozen plus brews they tried or they created, one was okay, so they decided for them and where they were at, and this was many years ago before Dayton had a brew community, that they decided they'd just go out and spend the money and just buy it. But yeah, now, and I've seen where people will get a group together and then they'll each make a different one and then trade, and so you get a good sampling. So yeah, I think I might want to have to give it another shot. Come back here. But also on your website, you have a section called the darker side, where I think
Darker Pages.
Darker Pages, yes. It's where you state, I like to make blank pages darker, which I think is really clever. I think it's funny. But you have a section there called Inflate Flat Characters by Breaking Stereotype. And in general, you have a bunch of blog posts there that sort of give advice to fellow writers or creative folks. And I thought that one was particularly appropriate for this topic of mashing genres, because before you can mash a genre, you have to really make it your own. You can't just, take Batman and be like, oh,
right,
or whatever. In your case, Snow White, you've created this new character. So you want to expand on how you took these sort of one-dimensional characters from Snow White tradition?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of touched a little bit on with Snow White. It was kind of just working backward from that one iconic moment. The other character, which you'll read about more in the second book, is actually the Evil Queen character.
Yeah.
And she's probably of the series, she's probably my favorite character. Because I wanted to kind of because she in the surface she's this very cardboard character. She wants to be the prettiest,
right,
and that gal's prettier, so you're gonna eat a poison apple. Screw you. I mean,
right,
that's that's pretty basic. So yeah, delving. She was one that I really wanted to kind of dig deeper and and figure out why was she like this? Why did she have this need to be the prettiest? What was going on there? And I don't want to give any spoilers, but yeah, she's definitely one where I found a lot more to her personality or to her essence than what the fairy tale would have. And then Grouchy too. He's a fun character, right? He's on the surface. He's this very gruff, cursing, intense character, but he's got a very soft heart, and he cares very deeply for Snow.
He has
probably
a little bit
too much.
he has a little bit of a crush on her, in fact.
Hardcore,
yeah.
yes. Yeah.
But well, on your website also, I thought it was really clever. You work with your daughter, and she interviews this queen, evil queen character, and you write as the queen, and then she writes as herself. And I thought it was really funny at the end. She asks the queen what the queen thinks of you, and she mentions something like, "Oh, well, he just makes up lies for a living."
He's a hack.
Yeah, he's a hack, and he didn't even introduce me till the end of the book. It just shows what a amateur he is. And so I thought it was really clever how you're bringing parts of your life and involving your daughter in that creative process.
Yeah, she came up with some really good questions. Those were all hers. We sat pretty much like this at our kitchen table. That's where I keep my laptop. That's where I write every morning. And since she got her own laptop, that's where she keeps hers. So there's a lot of mornings, especially on the weekends, whatever. We'll just sit there and I'm editing or writing, and she's either writing or maybe playing a game or watching YouTube or whatever. But we have a lot of moments just sitting across from each other, and that's how we did that interview. She would email me the question, and then I'd do my thing, and we just went back and forth for about an hour and had a really good time with it.
Yeah,
and
you can tell.
Yeah, and she's always been very tied in with my writing. I was telling you before we started taping that before my daughter was born, I was a poet. I pretty much strictly wrote poetry, and then it was something about becoming a dad. It flipped a switch, and I started writing some screenplays, stories, and then novels. So. For whatever reason, she's tied in with that. And then, of course, the first book that I published is pretty much all because of her and her obsession with this cartoon. So yeah.
So all the royalties go to her. And
well, we'll see.
Yeah. So let's see here. So do you have any advice for individuals that might want to do their own genre mashing, whether it be fine arts or written word?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a good question. A few months ago, my daughter and I, we went to the Highlands Nature Sanctuary, which is in southern Ohio. Beautiful, beautiful place. It was this volunteer weekend. We were helping them cook for this wildflower pilgrimage that they do each year, and we stayed with with a couple of sisters in this volunteer house. And I wish I could remember their names, but I can't. But they introduced Anna to all this kind of nature art where you take flowers, and then you cover them over with paper, and then you just smash the hell out of them, and then you get these amazing pigments and these kind of explosions of color. And then I'm trying to think what else they did. They were cutting open apples to make you can use the stars like a stamp. Oh, yeah. They were using celery to make rose stamps. If you cut a cross section of a piece of celery, you have this cool little pattern.
Oh yeah, makes a petal formation.
Yeah, so they were kind of doing this kind of basically nature art mashup kind of thing, and it just kind of it got me thinking, because at the time I was doing a lot of writing about writing, and it got me thinking about kind of the nature of doing genre mashups, and that it's kind of all about finding. So if you have two sort of story types, and it's kind of finding how they fit together, how where on the page they impact, or how this one thing can become this other thing, and so for in the Scarey Tales, it started with that moment where you have this girl in this field waking up from this kiss, and then you have, and that to me was sort of this moment that's set up for this something good can happen or something horrible can happen. Right. You know what I mean? It all kind of hinged on that moment, and that's where the two genres kind of stuck together. In the case of the Batman story I talked about earlier, it was all about that common shared city. You know what I mean? They just fit together so well. Right. So I think it's if you want to do genre mashups, you have to pick genres that you love, that you're interested in. A lot of people see this series and they oh good, I hate fairy tales. I want to I'd love to see these characters get eaten. And it's for me that's not what it's about. I love fairy tales. I love the stories. Even people talk about the Disneyfication, and I totally agree that happily ever after is not the best lesson you can teach young girls and boys. and finding your soulmate is not the solution to all your problems.
And killing the one that you think is prettier than you. Things,
not
good lessons to
learn.
learn.
Exactly. But there's a lot to love there. There's a lot of really cool, like I said, a lot of great imagery, a lot of fun, iconic characters, and so I think if you do it out of spite, it's nowhere near as rewarding either for the reader or for the writer. But if you take two genres that you love and you can find a way that they click, a way that they fit together, then some amazing things can happen.
Yeah.
And ideally, the two genres complement each other, and you find something new in each one of them. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I was curious, have you paired yourself up with illustrators before? I mean, I know you have the covers of your books, but going like a what do they call them? Graphic novel kind of thing?
It's something I would like to do at some point. Yeah. I've actually got a few ideas for some kind of like novellas or like one-off stories that I could do in the Scarey Tales world that wouldn't be part of the larger. As the whole 9 books, it's one long epic dark fantasy adventure. It starts with this one moment, and then it just keeps going, and it gets bigger and bigger and more epic. But there's definitely I've got a few like notions that wouldn't necessarily fit with that longer tale, but they could stand alone as their own stories. And I could totally see doing one of those in like graphic novel form, or even eventually adapting the series into graphic novel form. I would love that. I grew up reading comics. I love comics. There's really interesting things that happen on the page when you have text and pictures paired together. It's a very different reading experience than a straight book. It's a very different viewing experience than just looking at art. There's a whole lot of really cool. We could do a whole other show just on text and visuals and how those fit together. Yeah.
Well, maybe we need to talk. Maybe there's a collaboration there in our future.
I would love that.
That's something that I've definitely played around with. I have a lot of people that say, oh, you should do a children's book. Well, that market is so difficult to get into, and just coming up with a story that's simplistic enough, but it's interesting enough to want to spend all that time drawing. But I could definitely see myself getting into one of your stories. So maybe we'll have to talk about that. Yeah. So maybe that'll be a future episode of Art Hops. Welcome. Look at our. But so you gave me a list of stuff that you have coming up, which is pretty exciting. You want to talk a little bit about what you have coming up?
Sure. Let's see. Later this month in July, I'm going to be a member of the faculty at Antioch Writers Workshop. I'm coming back to do a first book talk, which is where they take people that have gone through the workshop before, I guess alumni that have gone on to be published, and then I'll be sharing my experience, what it was like to get my first book published with the people there, and that'll be super exciting because I've done Antioch Writers Workshop 3 times. And it's why these books are on this table. Like it would not have happened if not for Antioch and the faculty I met there, especially Les Edgerton, who pretty much got me connected with the publisher that's doing the Scarey Tales. So,
excellent.
So I'm really excited about that. That's going to be a lot of fun to come back there. I'll be at Tricon in Columbus, which is a comic book show in August. September, I'll be at Imaginarium down in Louisville, which is like a genre writing conference.
Oh, nice.
And then what I'm really super excited about, in October, I'm going to the Stanley Hotel Writers Retreat. So this is out in Colorado. This is the hotel where Stephen King stayed, where he got the idea to do The Shining. It's supposedly super haunted. It's where they actually filmed the TV movie version of The Shining. Oh. They just planted a new hedge maze.
Okay, yeah. I couldn't remember if I had seen that yet, but yes.
Yeah, and the talent that's going to be there is off the hook. And
nice.
One of my favorite horror writers, Jack Ketchum, is going to be there. So it's going to be an amazing few days. Yeah, I'm very excited for that.
Is that open to the public then?
Anybody can come out for it. Yeah,
nice.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think through the end of this month, they're probably still taking registrations. After that, it's closed.
Right.
But yeah, if anybody out there is interested in writing horror, that would be the place. That would be the place to go. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I think we have an individual that's behind the camera that might be interested in that. But I guess we'll kind of start to wrap it up. If people want to pick up one of your books, they can go to your website, right? robboley.com, and we'll have that at the end of the show with the notes. How else can they get in touch with you?
Probably my website's the best way to go, robboley.com. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook. I've got an email list through my website, so if you sign up for that, you get a free short story. And then I do like maybe monthly or every other month I send out messages, and I usually raffle off a free book or a free ebook. I like to do giveaways and stuff. I like to be generous. So, and then I'll keep people updated. Every once in a while I'll send out like a new short story that hasn't been published yet. And so I'll do some exclusive content for the email list as well.
Very cool. Excellent. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
being my guest for the third episode. And thank you, Eudora, for the Thunderballs. And thank you for joining us for episode number 3. See you next time.